I want to tell you exactly what happened outside apartment 4B, because half this city has seen the video, and every version they tell is wrong. New rates, new rules, can't pay, can't stay. Tyson Beaumont slammed the notice against my door with the flat of his hand. Hard enough that the frame rattled and a picture 2 feet away tilted on its nail. 40%. Typed up nice, on Marlowe Property Management letterhead. Folded into a landlord's smile. I heard Odessa Quinn's door creak open behind him at the same second, and I heard her grocery bag hit the stairwell rail before I heard her cry out. He didn't even look back at her. He kicked the bag, by accident, on his way past, and oranges went bouncing down 3 flights of stairs, thudding on concrete, rolling past open doors, past Joey from 3A leaning out to see what the noise was, his socked feet skidding on the landing as he tried to catch one and missed. One of those oranges came straight at my head. I caught it without looking. Didn't break my sentence. Didn't blink. My hand just closed around it, the way a man's hand closes around something when his nervous system learned its lessons somewhere. A lot harder than a stairwell in a Rust Belt apartment building. Tyson looked at my hand like it belonged to someone else. His grip on the doorframe, the one he liked to flex when he talked, went still for a second too long. He didn't understand what he'd just seen. He would. Everyone in this building would, eventually. The tenants, the code inspector. A stranger with a folder under his arm on a Friday morning none of us saw coming yet. But that Friday was still weeks off. And right now, all Tyson Beaumont knew was that the mechanic in 4B had just caught a piece of fruit like it was nothing. Like his hands had been trained somewhere his gym never touched. He didn't ask. He just smirked, tucked his thumbs into his rash guard collar, and said, "This building is my inheritance. You're just something it came with," before walking off swinging his keys like a man swinging a verdict. "Then inherit the paperwork, son," I said to his back, and he didn't turn around, but his shoulders tightened up around his ears. "I'm going to tell you the whole thing, in order, the way it happened to me, because you deserve better than the 30-second clip everyone's already seen. You deserve to know what that clip actually cost him, and it cost him a lot more than 1 minute on the grass. But before we continue, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time you saw this video. Tonight's story is one you will never forget. My name's Marcus Delgado. I'm 44 years old. I fix diesel engines for a living, 6 days a week, hands stained past the knuckle, no matter how much shop soap I use. Before that, I did 2 rotations as a Green Beret engineer sergeant. That's a job description that fits in 1 sentence and takes a decade to actually understand. You build the things that need building, and you take apart the things that need taking apart, and you learn the difference in the dark, under fire, with men counting on you to get it right the first time. I don't talk about it much. Greece doesn't care what you used to be. Neither does a landlord's son standing in a hallway with a rent notice in his fist. I moved into the Marlowe building 6 years ago because it was quiet, and quiet was the first honest sleep I'd had in years. Apartment 4B. water pressure that dropped every evening around 6, radiators that clanked like a drum line at 2 in the morning, a hallway that always smelled faintly of somebody's cooking and somebody's cheap cologne mixed together into something that felt weirdly like home. Neighbors who left their doors cracked because they trusted each other enough not to. Odessa Quinn had lived in 2C for 40 years, since before I was born, stitching hems and taking in suits for half the working men in this city, her sewing machine humming through the wall some nights like a lullaby. Nobody asked for, but everybody needed. Joey from 3A was 12 years old, all elbows and questions, and he thought my truck was the greatest machine ever assembled by human hands. I let him hold the wrench sometimes, told him that's how you learn, not from a video, from a bolt in your hand and somebody patient enough to let you strip one before you learn to tighten one right. I liked this building because nobody here needed watching. Turns out I was wrong about that. Turns out everybody here needed watching, and I was the only one built for it, and I didn't know it yet, and neither did they. I should tell you a little more about the 2 rotations, because it matters later, even if I don't like dwelling on it. My job over there was engineering. Bridges when the real ones were gone. Routes when the mapped ones were mined. Structures when a building needed to come down clean, instead of falling on the people inside it. You learn to read weight and pressure and failure points the way other men read a paragraph. You learn what a person's body does under real stress, not gym stress, not competition stress, the kind of stress where the only scoreboard is whether everybody walks away. I came home from the 2nd rotation and took the first quiet mechanic's job I could find. Because engines don't lie to you, and they don't ask you to explain anything you don't want to explain. Grease under the nails, radio off, wrench in hand. That was supposed to be the whole plan. Gerald Beaumont owned the Marlowe. Soft voice, the kind that made you lean in to hear him. Hard letters, the kind that landed in your mailbox and ruined a Tuesday. He was the sort of landlord who'd smile at you crossing the courtyard and mail you a notice that same afternoon that made your stomach drop. His son Tyson was 27, a BJJ black belt with a rash guard for every day of the week and a gym bag that never left his shoulder. Like he needed the whole building to remember what he was capable of, even when he wasn't wearing a gi. He flexed his grip on door frames when he talked. He called this building his inheritance more than once. Like the rest of us were furniture that happened to come with the lease. The rent hike notices went up on 6 doors that week. 6. Odessa's. Mine. The Hendersons in 1A, who had a 6-month-old and a car payment and no cushion at all. Tyson delivered every single one by hand, and every single one, he made sure you watched him deliver it, made sure your face did something he could enjoy. Can't pay, can't stay, he told Odessa, standing so close to her doorway that she had to tip her head back to look at him from her own threshold. 40 years doesn't mean anything on paper, ma'am. Paper's paper. She didn't answer him. She'd learned a long time ago that answering men like that only feeds them, gives them a reaction to chew on and enjoy for the rest of the day. I wrote it down. Date, time, exact words. In a little notebook I keep in my jacket pocket. A habit from a life where forgetting a single detail could get somebody killed. Grid coordinates, radio checks, names of men who needed remembering. Now it was rent notices and a black belt's cruelty. But the habit doesn't care what it's aimed at. It just wants accuracy. I wasn't planning anything yet. I was just doing what I always do. I was watching, and I was writing. Because somewhere in the back of my head, a voice that used to keep men alive in worse places than this stairwell was already telling me, document everything, Delgado. You never know which page saves the mission. 6 days later, the water went out in 2C and 4B. Both of us. Nobody else in the building. A handwritten notice on the boiler room door said under maintenance in Tyson's scrawl, sloppier than his gi was ever allowed to look. Odessa is 71 years old. 6 days without running water isn't an inconvenience for a woman her age. It's a health emergency waiting to happen. And everybody in that building knew it, including the man who'd shut the valve. On the 6th night I fixed it myself. 1 in the morning, flashlight in my teeth, pipe wrench in my grease-lined hand, the boiler room smelling like rust, and standing water, and old dust cooking off a pilot light. The valve hadn't broken. It had been shut manually, deliberate. A hand that knew exactly where the shutoff lived and exactly how much damage a closed valve does to an old woman's kidneys over 6 days. I turned it back on slow. Listened to the pipes groan and fill. The same patience I used to use clearing a room clean of anything that could hurt somebody. I didn't wake anybody. I just fixed what should never have been broken in the first place. Tyson found out by 9 the next morning, because water pressure doesn't lie, and he was furious that somebody had tampered with building infrastructure. He actually used that word, tampered. Like I'd sabotaged something instead of unsabotaging it, like fixing a woman's water was some kind of crime against his family's paperwork. He called a plumber to assess the damage, probably hoping to pin an actual violation on me, something official enough to matter, something with a fine attached. The plumber showed up around noon, crouched down at the valve with a flashlight of his own, looked at the wear pattern on the metal, looked at the shut-off logs Tyson had helpfully left taped to the wall, and said, right there in the hallway, in front of me and in front of the Hendersons, who'd come out to see what the noise was about, somebody closed this by hand recently. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a decision, and a bad one, this close to summer. Dead silence in that hallway. Mrs. Henderson's mouth actually fell open a little. The baby on her hip going quiet, like even she could feel the temperature change. Tyson's jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter, and he had no answer for a man he was paying by the hour to make him look right. That's karma, item 1, small, public. His own hired witness handed it to him, and he had to stand there and take it with his own gym bag still over his shoulder. I want you to understand something about how this works, because it's going to keep happening the whole way through this story. Tyson never got away with cruelty for free. Every single thing he did cost him something almost immediately, small visible, humiliating in its own quiet way, even while the big picture kept getting worse underneath it. That's not luck. That's what happens when a man builds his whole identity on being watched and admired, and then starts doing things worth hiding. The two don't mix for long. Eventually, somebody's always looking at the wrong moment, and Tyson never once checked who. There was a beat right after the plumber left that I still think about. Tyson stood there in the hallway a second too long, gym bag slack on his shoulder. And for half a heartbeat, something almost human crossed his face. The look of a young man who half wanted somebody to tell him to stop. It didn't last. He caught the Hendersons watching him, straightened up, and said, loud enough to erase whatever that flicker had been, "Old pipes. Not my problem what breaks in a building this age." One brief flicker of something real, gone before it could cost him a single ounce of the cruelty that followed. I wrote that down too, not because it excused anything, but because a good report includes everything you see, even the parts that don't fit the story you'd prefer to tell. He started small after that, testing what he could still get away with in front of an audience that was learning to watch him back. He'd let doors swing shut on Odessa's grocery cart instead of holding them. He'd park his own car crooked across two spots just to watch tenants circle the lot looking for room. Little things, cheap things. The kind of pettiness that doesn't make a police report, but adds a line to a notebook all the same. I kept writing. 6 weeks of pettiness stacks up faster than people expect. 2 days after the water, my truck disappeared from my own paid parking spot. Spot 14. I've had spot 14 for 6 years. Paid up through next spring. Receipt in a drawer in my apartment, along with 6 years of other receipts I never thought I'd need. I came down to head to the shop, and there was just an empty rectangle of oil-stained concrete where my F-250 should have been. Tire marks in the gravel, like the whole thing had been ripped away in a hurry. Towed. Lied vehicle, the tow company said flatly when I called. Reading off a work order somebody at the Marlowe had submitted that morning. Here's karma item 2, and this one's my favorite. Because I didn't even have to do anything. The lot signage, the actual legal posting that gives a landlord the right to authorize a tow, had lapsed 8 months earlier. Gerald never renewed the permit, which meant the tow itself was illegal, full stop, and a towing company doesn't eat that cost when they get it wrong. Somebody does. That somebody was Gerald. $340, reversal fee included, billed straight to the Marlowe Building's account, itemized, dated, unforgiving. Tyson took that call standing in the courtyard, on speaker, by mistake, thumb slipping on the wrong button, while half a dozen tenants were out there, enjoying the last warm evening of summer, lawn chairs unfolded. Somebody's radio playing low, from an open window. Everybody heard the tow company rep say, flat and bored, like she'd made this call 100 times. "Sir, your signage lapsed in January. This tow was invalid. We're reversing the charge and billing the property owner directly for our labor and the driver's time." A tenant near the mailboxes laughed once, sharp and loud, and didn't apologize for it. Somebody else muttered, "No way," under their breath, loud enough to carry. Tyson's face went the color of the brick behind him. He hung up so hard the phone nearly left his hand. And for a second he just stood there in the courtyard, like a man who'd forgotten every eye in the building was on him. Odessa brought me a plate of food that night, unasked, the way she'd apparently been doing for other tenants long before I moved in. Baked chicken, rice gone slightly cold from the walk down the hall, a fork wrapped in a paper towel. "You didn't have to fix that valve at 1 in the morning," she said, standing in my doorway in her housecoat. "I know," I told her. "Didn't have to, wanted to." She looked at me a long moment, the kind of look that's read a lot of men in her 71 years, and said, "You're not just a mechanic, are you?" It wasn't really a question. I didn't answer it directly. I just thanked her for the chicken and told her to lock her door behind her when she left, and she laughed. Soft, like she already knew that habit better than I did. I got my truck back 2 days later on the company's dime. Joey helped me check the tires like it was surgery, running his small hands over the tread, asking if towing damages the alignment, and I told him sometimes it does. And that's one more thing somebody has to pay for when they do things the wrong way. Word of the tow call got around faster than Tyson expected. He'd bragged for weeks at his gym about cleaning up his father's building, about tenants who needed a firm hand, and a training partner there, a big guy named Perez, who outweighed him by 30 pounds and had heard the courtyard story from a cousin who lived 2 buildings over. Brought it up during warm-ups, loud enough for half the mat to hear. "Heard your own tow truck turned around on you, champ. That how the black belt handles property management. Get towed by your own signage," the room laughed. Not cruel laughter. Just the kind that happens when a man's been talking too big for too long, and the math finally catches up with him in public. Tyson rolled twice as hard that night, got caught in an armbar he should have tapped out of 10 seconds sooner than he did, and left without showering. Small thing. Nobody outside that gym ever saw it. But I heard about it from a tenant whose cousin trained there, and I wrote it down anyway, because a pattern isn't complete without the pieces nobody's supposed to know about. I thought the toe was the worst of it. I was wrong. And the day I learned how wrong is the day everything in this story changed. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, the kind of heat that makes the asphalt shimmer. Joey was out front bouncing a basketball against the brick wall of the building. Thump, 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 waiting for me to get home, so he could ask about a compression test he'd read about on his phone. Tyson came around the corner in his gi pants and a Marlowe property management polo, gym bag over his shoulder as always. And he didn't like the sound of the ball against his building. "Tell your people to keep it down," he said to Joey. Not asked. Told, flat and final. Like the kid was a dog that needed training. And when Joey didn't answer fast enough, stunned into silence by the sharpness in a grown man's voice, Tyson grabbed his shoulder, grabbed it hard, fingers digging in through the thin cotton of his shirt, the kind of grip that leaves marks you don't see until bath time, the kind of grip a 12-year-old has no framework for. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember being between them. The basketball still bouncing once on its own behind me before it rolled to a stop against the curb. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "Take your hand off the boy," I said, quiet, level, and something in the way I said it made Tyson let go before his brain caught up with his hand. He tried to laugh it off, tried to say something about discipline, about respect, about his building and his rules and kids these days not knowing their place. I didn't answer any of it. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the notebook, and I opened it, slow, suntily, right there in front of him, and I let him see the pages. Dates, his own words, written down word for word, quotation marks and all. Photos of the shutoff valve, time-stamped. A copy of the lapsed parking permit. The plumber's statement, initialed. 6 weeks of a pattern, laid out in black ink, in a mechanic's handwriting that doesn't waste a stroke. Tyson went quiet in a way I hadn't seen from him yet. Up until that second, he thought he was just being a landlord's son, having some fun with people who couldn't fight back. That notebook told him otherwise. Even if he didn't fully understand what it meant yet. Neither did I. Not completely. Not until the boiler room. Still a couple weeks off. What came first was worse in its own quiet way, and it's the part that still sits heaviest with me. Before all that, though, there was one more small cruelty that changed how I saw this whole building, and I need to tell it in order, or it won't land the way it should. Tyson had started doing something new that week, showing up outside apartments at odd hours, knocking soft, asking tenants just a few questions about how long they planned to stay, whether they'd considered their options. Always alone. Always when nobody else was in the hallway to hear it. He tried it on me on a Sunday evening, leaning in my doorway with that same grip-the-frame posture, asking if I'd thought about what 40% really means long-term for a guy your age. I told him I'd thought about plenty of things long-term, and none of them involved taking advice from a man who kicked an old woman's groceries down a stairwell. He didn't have a comeback for that one. He just stood there a second, then walked off toward 2C, and I remember the cold feeling that dropped through my chest watching him go, because I already knew who he was headed to see next. Buyout letters landed in every mailbox on the same gray Thursday morning. Odessa cried standing right there at the boxes, an envelope shaking in her hand. 40 years of her life reduced to a number with a decimal point and a deadline stamped underneath it. Gerald stood in his own doorway down the hall, arms crossed, watching, smiling the whole time, the way a man smiles at a garden he planted himself and finally sees blooming. I got one too. Enough money to make a tired man think twice. More zeros than my truck was worth. More than enough to disappear into somewhere quiet and never look back at spot 14 or apartment 4B again. I want to be honest with you here, because the video everybody's seen doesn't show this part, and it should. I was tired, bone tired, the kind that doesn't come from one bad week, the kind that builds up over years of watching out for people and asking for nothing back in return. 2 tours will do that to a man. So will 6 years of being the guy everybody in a building quietly leans on without ever quite saying thank you out loud. I sat at my kitchen table that night with that buyout letter and an actual pen in my actual hand. And I came about as close as I've ever come to just signing it. Taking the money, driving somewhere quiet where nobody needed catching, where nobody's shoulder needed a hand pulled off it, where I could just be a mechanic and nothing else, where the notebook could stay closed in a drawer forever. I had the pen against the paper. I remember the exact second, the scratch of the nib just starting to press into the top line. Then somebody knocked. It was Joey, in his socks, holding his phone, with a diagram of a diesel engine pulled up on the screen, wanting to know why compression ratio mattered so much, wanting to know if I'd show him sometime on the real thing, wanting to know if that was even a stupid question to ask a grown man at 9 at night. It wasn't a stupid question. It was the only question that mattered that night. I put the pen down on the table, capped it, and told him to come in. I'd show him right now if his mom said it was okay. I didn't sign anything. I also didn't know yet that I'd been aiming my whole file at the wrong man. 2 weeks later, I was down in the boiler room, fixing a valve that Tyson swore up and down he hadn't touched this time. And for once, I believed him, because this wasn't his kind of sloppy work. This was careful, patient, the kind of problem that takes planning instead of temper. There's an old vent shaft down there that runs up into Gerald's second-floor office, a building quirk from whenever this place was built, and sound travels through it, clean as a phone line, if you're standing in the right spot with a wrench in your hand, and nowhere better to be for 10 minutes. That's how I heard it. Gerald's voice, soft as always. Talking to somebody I didn't recognize about a walkthrough and a clean handoff, and numbers with a lot of zeros attached to them. A condo developer. The whole building sold contingent on the long-term tenants being gone. But gone quiet, no formal evictions on record anywhere. Nothing that would slow down financing, or spook a bank inspector, or embarrass anybody sitting at a closing table months from now. And then Gerald said the sentence that turned my whole stomach over, the sentence I've replayed in my head probably 100 times since. Tyson handles the pressure side, keeps my name clean off the paperwork. He thinks he's earning the building, proving himself all that. Let him think that. Costs me nothing. His own son, a tool that believed it was an heir. A weapon Gerald had aimed at old women and children, and a tired mechanic while keeping his own hands soft and his own smile intact for exactly this kind of meeting. I stood there in that boiler room a long time, after the voices moved on, wrench still in my hand, water dripping somewhere, behind me, off a pipe I hadn't finished tightening, and I understood something I should have seen weeks earlier. Tyson wasn't the architect of any of this. He was cruel. He was petty. He said every one of his ugly little lines out loud and proud, like they were something worth being proud of. But he was still just the hand. Gerald was the one holding it, and Gerald had never once raised his voice, or grabbed a kid's shoulder, or shut off a valve himself. Gerald's cruelty didn't leave fingerprints. That's what made it worse. I'd been building a file to bury the wrong Beaumont. I stayed in that boiler room another 20 minutes after the voices upstairs went quiet. Just breathing, just thinking, wrench still loose in my hand. 2 rotations teach you a lot of things, but the one that mattered most right then was patience under new information. You don't act on the first read. You confirm. You cross-reference. You make sure the intelligence is solid before you move a single asset. So I didn't storm upstairs. I didn't confront Gerald in his office with a wrench still in my hand and a head full of boiler room echo. I climbed back to 4B, sat at the same kitchen table where I'd almost signed away my whole life, and I opened the notebook to a fresh page. I wrote, Re-AIM. Then I went back through 6 weeks of entries, and I drew a line from each one straight up to Gerald's name, item by item, the way you'd trace wiring back to a breaker box to find out which switch actually controls the light. The water shutoff. Gerald's signature was on the maintenance contractor invoice, dated 2 days before the malfunction. The tow. The work order had come from the property management account, and Tyson didn't have signing authority on that account. Only Gerald did. The buyout letters, printed on letterhead from a print shop Gerald used for every official document the building ever sent out, timed to land the same week as the tow reversal bill, like somebody was trying to bury bad news under worse news. So I started re-aiming it. Same notebook, same dates, same photos, same statements, same careful handwriting, but now every page pointed 1 floor up at soft voices and hard letters and a smile that had stayed on through 6 days without water and 40 years of somebody's life folded into a buyout envelope. The next domino fell 3 days later, and I didn't even have to push it hard. A city code inspector showed up unannounced on a Wednesday morning, citing the building for the water shutoffs. Somebody had called it in, and the tip mentioned dates and times so precise that whoever wrote it clearly had it all written down somewhere already, page by page. The way a man writes things down when forgetting isn't an option. I'm not saying who made that call. I'm saying the inspector's citation matched, almost word for word. 6 weeks of a mechanic's notebook. The fine landed on Gerald's desk with interest attached because the violation window had run longer than the standard grace period, and interest on a fine like that doesn't care how soft your voice is. The same week, one more small thing came apart in public. Tyson had installed a doorbell camera outside Odessa's door months earlier, telling anyone who asked it was for building security, recording her comings and goings from the mailbox to the laundry room, like she was a suspect in her own home of 40 years. He'd shown the footage off once or twice, bragging about keeping an eye on things. Somebody in the building, I still don't know who, and it wasn't me, posted a clip of it to a neighborhood group online with a caption asking why a landlord's son was surveilling a 71-year-old woman doing her laundry. It did not look like responsible property management to anyone who saw it. It looked exactly like what it was. Within 2 days, his own jiu-jitsu gym quietly pulled his photo off their coaching staff page. No announcement, no drama, no explanation. Just his bio, gone. like he'd never taught a fundamentals class there at all. He noticed within the hour. He came home that night with his jaw set so tight I could hear his teeth grinding from across the courtyard. Gym bag slung over one shoulder like it suddenly weighed twice as much. And then, by accident, the same kind of accident that seems to follow careless men everywhere they go, I got a text meant for Gerald. Wrong number, 1 digit off, from an assistant confirming a final walkthrough with the developer's representative. Friday, 10 a.m. Courtyard. Please have the building looking presentable. Friday. I looked at that message for a long time, standing in my own kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd almost signed my way out of all of it. I thought about the buyout pen. I thought about Odessa's 40 years of curtains. I thought about a kid's shoulder with fingerprints on it under a thin cotton shirt. I went down the hall first, before I did anything else, and knocked on 2C. Odessa opened the door in her housecoat, surprised to see me at that hour, and I told her plain and simple that Friday was coming, that a stranger with a folder was going to walk through this courtyard, and that whatever happened, she should be outside at 10 with her chair and her coffee like any other morning. She didn't ask why. She just nodded the way people nod when they've survived enough winters to trust a plan they can't fully see yet. I did the same at the Hendersons, and I did the same. Careful and quiet, with Joey's mother asking only that the boy be allowed to hold his phone steady if I asked him to. Nothing more. Nothing that would put a 12-year-old anywhere near danger. She said yes before I'd even finished the sentence. People in that building had been watching me watch out for them for 6 years. That kind of trust doesn't get built. It gets earned one small thing at a time. The same way rust builds on a bumper, one damp morning after another. Then I started copying pages, sitting at that same kitchen table until almost 2 in the morning, making sure every date lined up, every photo was legible, every statement was signed. I made 3 copies. One for the developer's representative, one for a lawyer I'd already quietly consulted 2 weeks earlier on my lunch break, and one that stayed folded in my jacket pocket where the original notebook always lived, close to my chest. The way you keep the thing that actually matters closest when everything else is just noise. Friday came in, hot and bright. The kind of late summer morning that makes a courtyard look better than it's ever looked. Green grass Gerald had actually paid to have mowed for once in 6 years. Edges trimmed, a folding table set up near the entrance with a pitcher of lemonade nobody would end up drinking. Every tenant somehow found a reason to be outside at exactly 10 a.m. Odessa, on her folding chair by the mailboxes, purse in her lap, like she was headed to church. The Hendersons with the baby on a hip, diaper bag over one shoulder, watching from the shade of the entryway. Joey sitting on the low courtyard wall with his phone already in his hand, because I'd asked him the night before, quiet, just to have it ready and not ask why. And he hadn't asked why. He'd just nodded like a soldier taking an order. The developer's representative arrived in a gray sedan right on time, stepping out in a pressed shirt, with a folder tucked under one arm, the kind of folder that decides things nobody in that courtyard could see the inside of yet. Gerald met him at the gate with a smile, wide enough to hide a whole building's worth of shutoffs behind it, talking about pride of ownership and a legacy property with real bones, like the words, tasted good, rolling off his tongue. I stood near the fence with my coffee going cold in my hand, notebook and photocopies folded flat in my jacket, watching Gerald walk that stranger past the freshly mowed grass, like a man showing off a used car with the check engine light taped over. He gestured at the brick facade, the restored mailboxes, the folding table with its untouched pitcher of lemonade sweating in the sun. Every word out of his mouth was smooth, rehearsed, soft as ever. He didn't once mention 6 days without water. He didn't once mention a citation sitting on his own desk with interest attached. I watched Odessa watch him too. Her jaw tight, her hands folded in her lap, the same patient way they'd been folded through 40 years of landlords who came and went while she stayed. Tyson stood off to the side near the fence, arms crossed, and I watched something come apart behind his eyes, while he watched his father work the crowd of one. A week of small losses, the plumber's statement, the illegal tow, the gym quietly erasing him, a code citation with his handwriting practically stapled to it. And now his father's big moment happening 10 feet away while he stood there like hired help. Nobody had bothered to introduce. He needed something. He needed it in front of everybody. And he needed it to be about him, not his father, not the folder, not the polite man in the pressed shirt. He walked straight at me and blocked the courtyard gate with his shoulder, the same way he'd blocked the mailroom door months back. Except this time his voice carried loud and clear for the whole crowd to hear, pitched to make sure the developer's rep looked up. "Roll with me, grease monkey," he said. Chin up, gym bag dropped at his feet like he'd been waiting all morning for an excuse to open it. "Right here, right now. You last 1 minute against me. Your rent stays where it is. You tap, you're gone by Friday. Whole building can watch. Let's see what those hands of yours are really worth." Every conversation in that courtyard died at once. Odessa's hand went to her mouth, purse forgotten in her lap. The Hendersons' baby was the only sound for a second, some small, confused noise into her mother's shoulder, and Mrs. Henderson herself went half still, half rising off the low wall like she wanted to step in and didn't know if she was allowed to. Joey's thumb was already moving on his phone screen. Timer up, camera up. Hands steadier than a 12-year-old's hands have any right to be under that kind of pressure. Gerald's smile flickered for the first time all morning, not sure yet whether his son had just handed him a gift or a disaster. I declined flat, one word. No. Tyson grinned like I'd confirmed something for him. Stepped in closer, said it again louder for the folder-carrying stranger's benefit. Landlord's son, black belt, building's rightful heir. About to teach the tenant in 4B a lesson everybody in this courtyard would be talking about for years. I gave him the only warning I was going to give, quiet enough that only the people closest could hear it clean. "Don't do this, Tyson." He shot in anyway, low, fast, textbook clean. For a half second, the whole courtyard seemed to hold its breath at once. Odessa's chair creaked as she leaned forward. Somebody's radio, still playing low from an open window, kept going through the silence like it hadn't noticed anything was wrong. I heard Joey whisper, "No way," under his breath. Phone locked steady in both hands like I'd taught him to hold a wrench, elbows braced against his knees. Here's what sport training gets you, and here's what it doesn't. Tyson had a beautiful double leg takedown. Clean level change, good penetration step, hands locked exactly where a competition mat teaches you to lock them, hips driving forward with real power behind them. Against another athlete on a mat, under a referee's whistle and a scoreboard, it probably scores every single time. This wasn't a mat. This was grass with give in it. Morning dew still damp under the blades. A man across from him who'd spent 2 rotations learning that balance beats strength every single time somebody forgets to check both. Who'd trained in mud and gravel and rooftops, where the ground itself could turn into a weapon if you didn't respect it. I didn't fight his takedown. I let it happen, and I redirected it. Turned my hips a half second before his weight fully landed. Took the shot he'd already committed to and folded it sideways into the ground. Instead of straight down onto his terms, control the whole way through. Elbow tucked tight against my ribs, breathing slow and even through my nose. Weight settling onto him like something poured rather than something thrown. No slam. No strike, just angles, leverage, and 100 hours of practice he'd never once had to face, because nobody in his gym had ever made him face it. 40 seconds on Joey's timer, counted out loud later by half the courtyard from the footage. Cross-body pin, shoulder pressure applied clean and steady. One arm trapped with no room to escape, no room to breathe deep enough to think his way out of the position. My pulse never left idle the whole time. Slow, and even like I was checking a torque spec instead of pinning a man to the grass. His was hammering against my forearm like a trapped bird throwing itself against a window. 10 seconds in, Tyson tried to bridge and roll the way his gym had drilled 1,000 times against a pin exactly like this one. It's a good escape on a mat against someone who doesn't already know it's coming. I felt the bridge start, shifted my hips a fraction lower, killed the angle before it ever became a threat, and settled my weight back down heavier than before. He tried again at 20 seconds, this time throwing an elbow that had nothing behind it but panic, no leverage. No base, the kind of strike a man throws when his training has run out and his body is improvising. I absorbed it against my forearm without losing position. By 30 seconds, his breathing had gone ragged, short, and high in his chest instead of low in his belly. The exact opposite of what 2 rotations teach you to do when the moment gets tight. Mrs. Henderson had both hands over the baby's ears without seeming to realize she'd done it. Gerald had gone rigid by the gate. Folder holding stranger forgotten beside him, he tapped, palm slapping the grass twice, hard. I let go the instant his hand hit the ground. No extra second held for effect, no message sent with my hands after the fact. I stood up, straightened my shirt where it had ridden up, and that was the whole fight. The cold open you saw at the top of this story, except now it was twice the size, in front of the whole building, and the one visitor the Beaumonts most needed to impress, folder and all. "You wanted 1 minute of my time," I said. Quiet enough that the courtyard had to lean in to catch every word. "It's cost your family the building." I stood up slow, the way you stand up when you've made your point, and you don't need to make it twice. Tyson stayed down in the grass a moment longer, shoulder rolling, chest heaving, gym bag still sitting untouched by the fence, where he'd dropped it like a promise he never got to keep. Nobody in that courtyard clapped. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that, heavier. The sound of 40 people finally exhaling at once, after holding their breath for 6 weeks, without knowing they'd been holding it. Then I did the thing that actually mattered more than the pin ever could. I walked past Tyson, still sitting in the grass working his shoulder with one hand, and I handed the developer's representative a photocopied dossier I'd been carrying, folded flat in my jacket for exactly this morning. Water shutoffs, dated and witnessed by a licensed plumber. The illegal tow and the lapsed signage that made it illegal. The city citation with interest attached, Gerald's name at the top in bold. The buyout letter timeline, 6 letters mailed the same gray Thursday. No formal evictions filed for any tenant. Exactly the clean handoff Gerald had described, through a boiler room, vent to a man who never once suspected I was standing below him with a wrench in my hand. "New rates, new rules," I said, handing it over, giving Tyson his own words back, exactly the way he'd delivered them to Odessa at her own front door months earlier. The rep opened the folder, flipped through maybe 4 pages, read them slow and careful, and closed it again without a single wasted expression on his face. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We're pausing this," he said to Gerald. Not unkindly, just final. The tone of a man who had seen this exact kind of folder-end deals before. Litigation exposure like this doesn't close today. Might not close this quarter. My office will follow up. Gerald's smile finally cracked, right there in public, in front of the exact audience he'd built this whole morning to impress. That crack was the one thing his money couldn't buy back, couldn't smooth over, with a soft voice or a hard letter or a son, sent out to do the ugly parts of the job. Odessa's hand stayed pressed over her mouth, eyes bright. One of the tenants near the mailboxes laughed once, too loud. The same sharp laugh from the parking lot weeks earlier. Like the sound had just been waiting for permission to come out again. And finally got it. Joey kept the phone rock steady the entire time. 41 seconds of footage that would end up everywhere by Sunday night. Shared and reshared until half this city had watched it and started arguing about the parts they never saw firsthand. I want to tell you the part that clip never shows, because you've earned it by now, sitting here with me this long. I had that buyout pen in my hand 3 weeks before any of this happened. I was that close to signing, that close to driving off, and letting this building figure itself out without me. Because 2 tours and 6 years of quietly watching over people I never asked to watch over had worn me down further than I liked to admit even to myself. If Joey hadn't knocked on my door that night with a question about compression ratios, I honestly don't know which way that pen goes. A 12-year-old asking about a diesel engine is the only reason Odessa Quins still has 40 years of curtains hanging in that window today. Here's where things stand now, plain and concrete. No dramatics, because you deserve the real ending, and not just the highlight reel. Gerald paid every fine, the water citation and the tow reversal both, full amount, no appeal, because his own lawyer took one look at my dossier and told him an appeal would only put more of it in front of a judge who'd already have questions. The tenants formed an association 2 weeks later, sitting around Odessa's kitchen table with tea going cold while we wrote out bylaws in a notebook a lot like mine. Joey included, taking notes because he asked to. Tyson doesn't manage the Marlowe anymore. Officially, he's been moved to oversee other properties for the family. Unofficially, there are no other properties, not one, and there hasn't been a single sighting of that rash guard rotation since. He's somewhere out there figuring out what a black belt is worth once nobody's afraid of him anymore. And I hope, honestly, that he figures out something better than what he was doing here. I still fix diesel engines every morning, 6 days a week, same shop, same grease under the same nails. I still live in 4B, same water pressure dropping every evening at 6 like clockwork. I still let Joey hold the wrench. And last week he tightened his first bolt to spec without me telling him when to stop. Odessa keeps a folding chair by the mailboxes now, permanent fixture, and she waves at every new tenant who moves in like she's been waiting for them, personally. The Hendersons' baby is walking now, unsteady little steps across the same courtyard grass that once had a black belt pinned flat against it. Somebody planted a small vegetable garden along the fence line this spring. Nobody's officially in charge of it. Everybody just quietly waters it when they pass. And I think that's the real association bylaw nobody ever bothered writing down. I don't get thanked much for any of it, and I've stopped needing to be. That was never the part I was chasing. People ask me sometimes, at the shop, over a beer, whether I miss the life I had before this one, the rotations, the gear, the version of me that could clear a room in the dark. I tell them the truth. I don't miss the danger. I miss knowing exactly what I was for. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand that a building full of tired, decent people needed the same thing a squad ever did. Somebody willing to notice what's wrong before it gets worse, and willing to stay when staying costs something. That's not a smaller job than the one I used to have. It's just quieter. I think about that pen more than I think about the takedown. If I'm being completely honest with you, anybody can win 40 seconds on a lawn once the training's already there. It takes something else to sit at a kitchen table on your worst night, pen against paper, and choose to stay anyway. That's the part of this story that never makes it into the clip. And it's the part I'd want you to remember longest if you only remember one thing. Quiet strength doesn't announce itself in a courtyard. It just keeps showing up the next morning, same as always, whether anybody's watching or not. And that's the only kind of strength that ever really holds up over 40 years in one building. Here's a question worth sitting with before you go. Marcus had a file ready for court. Clean, dated, lawyer-proof. 6 weeks of documentation that would have won on paper alone. And he still let it come down to a physical challenge in front of the whole building. Should he have gone straight to the courts and never let Tyson lay a hand on him at all, kept it clean, kept it legal, kept it off the grass entirely? Or did a building full of frightened tenants need to actually see it happen with their own eyes? Watch the fear leave the courtyard in real time before any piece of paper could mean anything to them at all. Tell us which side you're on and tell us why. If this story hit you, subscribe now. Share it with someone who respects quiet strength. And tell us in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. We will see you for the next story. It is already waiting.